welcome to this Declassified Live. We're hoping to do much more of this in 2026, so it's great to see you here for this first live event. We are going to be joined by some wonderful contributors tonight. I'll be your host. My name's Laura Pidcock, and I'm the co-director of Declassified. We are an independent media organisation. Mark Curtis, who is also a co-director of Declassified, will be joining us, along with Martin Williams, our chief investigator, Dania Akkad, who is our deputy editor, Hamza Yusuf, who is a British Palestinian journalist and Declassified contributor. And we're going to be looking back on the year. Declassified has managed to fit in so much reporting, exclusive revelations, which have had real world impact in the last year. We never want our journalism to just stay on the page or the screen, but to come alive through the public service journalism, which is fearless and independent. And this last 2 years has showed us that we need independent, fearless journalism more than ever. That journalism obviously costs money to deliver, so I promise I won't go on about this all evening, but I wanted to let you know that we do have a winter fundraiser at the moment, and we are just £7,995 away from reaching our target, which is in the whole thanks to people who have sent in individual donations. We could not be more grateful for that, but it would be great to even half that or get rid of that target by the end of this show. But you can donate via the link that's going across the screen right now. We also have, and this is in line with wanting to do more in-person meetings, we also have a very important summit that is taking place on Saturday, the 31st of January. Tickets for that are on sale. You'll see that now. That's going to bring together activists, journalists, people who are fighting for change, and we're going to think about how do we challenge the war machine? How do we challenge the UK's support for Israel? How do we contribute to active anti-war alternatives, not just assessing the problems, but really trying to get to the heart of what we do. The last thing I'll say before I bring in Mark Curtis is we want you to ask questions. Please do that. Please ask away, ask our guests anything that you want, and I'll try and get to those questions as well. So yeah, let me introduce first Mark Curtis. Mark founded this organization. He was part of creating Declassified UK's existence. It's so good to have you here. You are a co-director, and I just wanted to start, Mark, by saying, how has the last year been as co-director of Declassified?
Oh, well, yeah, I could say quite a lot about that, really. Let me give you some of my thoughts, because I think 2025 has been quite an amazing year. I mean, for all of us, but a deeply worrying year in a lot of ways. I mean, I think what 2025 has shown above all else is that our leaders are our biggest threat. They've torn up international law, human rights law, and kind of any vestiges of the rules-based international order on the altar of supporting Israel. And allowing it to get away with its crimes and the supreme crime, genocide. I mean, UK ministers can't even mention Israeli war crimes, let alone genocide, and they can't bring themselves to uphold the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court rulings to which they're signatories. And I think it's really dangerous for all of us, the precedents that these kinds of policies that we've seen over the last year have set. And we're seeing our leaders clamp down on civil liberties and the right to protest, again, in order to back Israel. The banning of Palestine Action as a terrorist group is what I would call a kind of extremist moment. I mean, it shows how extreme our leaders have actually become or are, and how far they'll go in defense of a genocide. I mean, I think the other thing for me is that UK military leaders are now going around saying that we must prepare for war with Russia. And we're pumping in billions of equipment to Ukraine in its war with Russia. to help the UK arms industry and supposedly to help defend Ukraine. But in reality, that war is to enable Whitehall to achieve its geopolitical objectives of rivaling Russia and securing Ukraine as a new market and a strategic ally. And as I've written for Declassified throughout this year, Britain prefers war over peace in Ukraine. And we're seeing increases in military spending, which actually means giving more public money to arms companies. That's what increases in military spending substantially means. And a government that literally sees defense as an engine of economic growth. I mean, that's the phrase that they constantly use because it's supposed to provide jobs. So that means that the government actually regards war as a good thing. That's where we are. And all of this is being supported by the UK national media with very few exceptions. So I actually think it's a seriously quite dangerous time. We're saddled with a warmongering government, an oligarchic political system, and a compliant media. And I mean, I think in that situation, Declassified's role is as important as it could be, really. I mean, we see our role as telling the truth in the public interest. Millions of people are angry and frustrated about the situation. And I think that this is one reason why we've been able to massively increase our public support throughout this year. We're getting millions of views on our YouTube channel, over 12 million in the last year. I think it might be even up to nearly 15 million. Over 1 million views on our articles and our revelations. Our articles are being picked up around the world in media. Not so much in the UK, which has a very controlled media, but around the world. And we're getting inundated with people wanting to write for us or work with us. And yeah, we want to continue growing next year. And as Laura said, if people can help us, then that would be tremendously useful because we are reliant on the public and a very small number of trust and foundations for our funds. I wanted to come on to talk about one particular piece of work that Laura and I worked on recently, which is about what Gaza reveals about how we're governed. I mean, what it reveals about British policymaking. Because my view is that Gaza should be a pivotal moment in British history. I mean, it shows that our political system has allowed the British establishment to be complicit in one of the worst horrors of our time. I mean, Israel's 2-year offensive against Palestinians, complete with all the ethnic cleansing and systematic attacks on schools and hospitals, crimes against humanity. I mean, Gaza confirms that there is little morality in British political decision-making. But as Laura and I say in the article, this doesn't mean that the British system is broken. This is working as it's intended to. You know, what Gaza illustrates is deep problems in British governance. And it exposes, in our view, the illusion that the UK is in fact a democracy. And Laura and I write that a mass movement is needed to address the major issues. Let me kind of briefly outline what I think those are. I mean, I think first of all, most obviously what Gaza has shown is that Whitehall's foreign policy making does not prioritize human life or even take it seriously. That's important. But Gaza also shows that although every UK government says it upholds international law, that's plainly untrue. I mean, Gaza highlights that ministers think they can behave like criminals, that they can support criminal acts overseas, and that they can support the laws that they like and ignore the laws that they don't like. But unfortunately, we also have to face the fact that there's currently very little chance of holding British ministers to account for their complicity in Israel's genocide because the UK's governance system has been designed so that can't happen. I mean, we have this medieval concept called crown immunity, which makes ministers immune from prosecution for their role in deaths overseas, as in Palestine, or in fact, at home. If you look at the deaths as a result of government policy due to COVID or due to austerity, ministers just can't be held to account for those under us in our system. And then what about our own ability as individuals or as groups, as a movement of people? What about our own ability to influence policy making? I mean, because of course there has been major public opposition to the UK's complicity in genocide. But the problem is that once Whitehall has fixed its policies, there are very few ways the public can actually influence it, certainly in terms of foreign policy, and particularly not through formal mechanisms. So Britain has all the fancy trimmings of democracy, but very little of the real practice of it when it comes to influencing actual government policy making. And I think that in reality, UK foreign policy making is made by an elite few. It routinely doesn't promote the national public interest or real national security. And then, of course, one massive block that we all come up against, I mean, as journalists and as individuals or campaigners, is official secrecy, which is a kind of a chief currency of Whitehall. So we're not allowed to know anything about GCHQ, the spy agency, or MI6, intelligence collaboration with Israel throughout the genocide. The government won't even publish its 2020 military agreement with Israel, or the formal legal advice that it's received on Israel's breaches of international humanitarian law. We've been writing about those things and investigating those things throughout 2025, and we're constantly coming up against this official secrecy. The other barrier that we face is the rest of the media. I mean, the Britain's national media, and Gaza very clearly shows that mainstream media routinely function as de facto assets of the state, amplifying the state's views, failing to report adequately independent or contradictory narratives. And if you compare the British national media with our revelations about the extent to which the UK has been supporting Israel over the last 2 years, well, I mean, there's nothing to compare, really. I mean, we're reporting independently. The media have been regularly parroting Israeli propaganda. Then there's the Israel lobby, and this is another big issue in our society. And this is something that I really urge people to look at our articles on our website, declassifieduk.org, about, because we've done a lot of revelations about the role of the Israel lobby in the UK. Unfortunately, revealing the extent of that Israel lobby and Israeli influence over policy making is still seen as a taboo subject in many circles, including in the national media. But the reality is that, and as we've tried to document, that figures and groups in the Israeli lobby in Britain have been shown to fund an extraordinary array of MPs, hold off-the-books meetings with ministers, lobby the government to secure policy changes, and wield undue influence over the media and the political agenda. We've been investigating that. And I think that independent organizations must continue to expose the power and activities of that lobby and force democratic changes through campaigning. Gaza also shows the government's willingness to shelve some of our key democratic rights on the altar of backing a foreign state and one engaged in genocide. The clampdown on the right to protest that I was mentioning earlier, that's included the jailing of pro-Palestine activists and the raiding of homes of protest leaders and journalists for pro-Palestinian views. We've been trying to document that as well, trying to interview people in the thick of that and trying to raise their views and provide a platform for the concerns that we have. So we have major governance problems, and I think this is something that our work kind of points in the direction of. And we mean in the next year to continue to expose what's going on. We'll continue to investigate independently the reality of Britain's policies around the world. And we need to be looking at not only Gaza, but Ukraine, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Kenya, Venezuela, the nuclear arms issue, arms exports, the UK role in climate change, UK corporations. I mean, there's a very, very long list of issues. And, you know, we're a tiny organization. But I hope that in the process of us doing that, we'll reach larger numbers of people than ever. and we'll be lending our support, and that our information is key to campaign groups and legal groups trying to change things. I mean, we are clearly a media organisation, not a campaigning organisation, but we'd like to see the development of a stronger movement in this country against war and militarism and impunity, and that for a new progressive community to work inclusively and to popularise anti-imperialist and anti-war struggles, and to connect those to the major public concerns of the day, like poverty and housing and cuts to public services, the things that really matter to people. And I think that movement should also be defending free speech and other civil liberties, and it should be cultivating independent media organizations like ourselves. And so I'd like to see the public supporting us more, but supporting other independent media organizations as well. So next year, we know that we've got a lot of work to do, and we'll build on the successes of this year. And I just hope that people will keep supporting us and support us even more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was a tour de force of the issues and the impact that the genocide in Gaza has had on our own political system. And you're right in the sense that, you know, there have been heroic efforts by people to campaign against the genocide, and people have repeatedly got in touch with their members of parliament, and we write about it in the article. All different kinds of tactics have been used. People have really tried, and yet the genocide prevailed, and yet there is no justice and no accountability for the ministers in government. Not, as you said, because of any kind of accident, but because the system builds in that level of impunity. And instead of responding by kind of through a framework of morality, there is a response which is about, and this is why I appreciated your kind of closing points about freedom of speech, is that there is this a sense that instead of responding through the framework of morality, there is a restriction on civil liberties. So again, we see legislation proposed about cumulative protests and, you know, more police powers and policing language and placards, and whether you agree with the placards or not, we surely have to stand for people's right to be able to counter and protest against the government. And, you know, lots and lots of declassified reporting will be looking at how people are campaigning against the government. But I think you're right, Mark. Some of those foundational, and we are going to say this as an independent media organisation, but some of those fundamental freedoms that people fought for hundreds of years ago are now back on the table as things that we have to fight for. Mark, thank you very, very much for your contribution. One of the things that Declassified has done this year and spent a lot of time doing is putting together our first documentary. This documentary was entitled, Will This Documentary Put Keir Starmer Behind Bars? And it looks at exposing the shady spy flights and the missions for Israel. So we're going to play a clip of it in just a second, but really it's about what does a British base in Cyprus have to do with Israel's genocide in Gaza. Let's have a little look at the documentary clip now.
What does a British base in Cyprus have to do with Israel's genocide in Gaza?
Although we're really proud of what you're doing, we can't necessarily tell the world what you're doing here.
Declassified travelled to this Mediterranean island.
How do you think he knew our names?
To investigate the hundreds of spy flights that Keir Starmer has sent over Gaza.
That's what they're doing. They're off on a death run.
UK is now paying American mercenaries to do their dirty work over Gaza.
That coincided with Israeli airstrikes and the murders of British aid workers.
You're suddenly looking on the television, there's your son in a body bag, and that is one memory that will stay in my mind forever.
We go where the British media and military experts have refused to look, and ask whether this scandal could put Keir Starmer in The Hague.
Out! British bases out! Out! British bases out!
I really do urge you to go and watch that documentary. It is entirely produced, directed, filmed in-house by Phil Miller and our colleague Alex Morris. It takes an incredible amount of work to put a feature-length documentary like that together. And we're a small team. We have expanded loads in Declassified, but we are still a small team. And one of the things it kind of shows and is essentially that, you know, you can produce unbelievable investigations with the determination and with the rigor that we have here. And it just goes to show the mainstream media have been absolutely missing on some of the key questions in relation to Britain and their complicity in the genocide. I'm bringing in next Martin Williams. He's our chief investigator. And one of the things that we are becoming known for, if you like, in Declassified is a tactic called doorstepping. I'm just going to have a little conversation with you about this, Martin, but many people would have seen our colleague Phil Miller. He's approached many high-profile people, influential people, high-ranking military figures, politicians. In fact, let's see some of that action now.
General Bashir.
Admiral Radican, Chief of the Defence Staff. Lovely to meet you today. Air Chief Marshal. Lovely to meet you. My name's Phil Miller. I'm a journalist. How's the conference? Good afternoon, Police Commissioner. I'm Phil Miller. I'm a journalist from Declassified UK. Trevor Chin. I've got a couple of questions. I'm a journalist. But no journalist has asked you about the Royal Air Force spy flights over Gaza, have they, Minister? Minister Reynolds, why are you still allowing arms exports to Israel? You don't need to push our photographer over. Please don't touch me. I pose no threat. I'm a journalist. I'm allowed to ask questions.
That's treating. Did you enjoy your champagne home courtesy of the Wallenberg?
I'm not going to comment on it. You're not on that. Prime Minister, why are you shaking hands with a man who said there are no innocents in Gaza?
I mean, that was a really low moment in British politics, that last clip where we had the Prime Minister inviting the President of Israel to the UK, and Phil was one of the only people to ask pertinent questions about his visit. Now, obviously, you know, you have doorstep people. It's a classic journalistic technique, one which we don't really see much of these days. Martin, why, you know, you've doorstepped Emily Thornberry, David Lammy, Peter Princely, MP. Phil has doorstepped Israeli General Odyud Basiuk, Admiral Sir Tony Radican, the list goes on. Why don't you just sit down with these people and put the questions to them? Oh, Martin, sorry, we don't have any sound on your end.
Try that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You can hear me. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, we would love to sit down with these people and talk to them, but they just won't do it. Doorstepping, actually, I'll just give you a bit of context on doorstepping. It's actually quite an old technique in journalism, really. And the idea is essentially that sometimes there's a strong public interest in asking someone questions, but they refuse to do a sit-down interview. They refuse to answer things over email. So instead, you approach them with a microphone, usually as they're walking down the street. I suppose that's why it's called doorstepping, because you might wait for them traditionally on their front doorstep. And so sometimes you will see doorstepping done by mainstream news outlets. But I think it's pretty rare nowadays. I mean, you used to have reporters like Michael Crick on Newsnight, Channel 4 News, who had a bit of a reputation for doorstepping. And actually, The Guardian once described it as one of reporting's most essential tools. But really, nowadays you don't see it very often. Over the years, I think Ofcom regulations have got a bit stricter. A lot of news outlets are probably a combination of a bit scared, a bit lazy, a bit too busy to do this kind of thing. But I think at Declassified, I think often we're left with really no choice but to doorstep people, especially this year with regards to the UK's complicity in the genocide. And, over the summer, we published a list of 70 questions, I think it was, that the British government needs to answer about Gaza. And these are really essential questions, many of which get to the heart of whether our political leaders are war criminals, whether they have covered up evidence of massacres. The public interest in asking these questions is totally overwhelming. But it's not just that the government refuses to do sit-down interviews with us. The issue is also that these questions are almost completely ignored by the vast majority of the media. So without Declassified doing these kind of doorstep interviews, a lot of these questions might literally just never even be asked, let alone answered. As you said, Laura, majority of these doorstep interviews have been done by Declassified's editor, Phil Miller. He's tried to get answers from, as we saw there, the likes of John Healey, the defence minister, Admiral Radakin, who was chief of defence staff at the time of that interview. And then in September, we applied for a media pass at the Labour Party conference because we thought that would be a good opportunity to talk to a lot of these people. And at the very last minute, we were rejected without explanation. So I went along anyway with a camera operator, and we basically just spent the entire day camped outside the Labour Party conference. And we just spent the entire day doorstepping politicians: David Cameron, Emily Thornberry, Tom Watson, Ellie Reeves, Chris Bryant, lots and lots of them. And we were literally there for about 10 hours, I think. And the question we were asking was so simple. It was, is there a genocide in Gaza? And the thing is that the answer to that question is not just about acknowledging what's going on. It also has really serious legal implications for the British government, because if they recognise it as a genocide, then they have legal obligations, which would kick in to kind of try and prevent complicity. So by walking away from our camera, as they repeatedly did time and time again, the message they were sending to people was basically that this question was one that they were not even willing to engage in. Doorstepping, I think, is going to continue to be a kind of a crucial tool for us, for the time being, at least.
I agree. And I think that one of the things that has been so frustrating about some of our work is that these mainstream media outlets have these slots that are given to ministers, and they are in front of them every weekend on the morning media rounds, afternoon and evening media rounds, and yet they just do not put the questions. Think about our documentary, for example, really pertinent questions about the extent to which the British state, the government, is implicated in a genocide or is complicit in a genocide in Gaza. And then they don't put the questions. They don't ask any of the questions. And so, of course, people lose trust, quite rightly have lost trust in the mainstream media. And I think this is a tactic that we will continue to employ in 2026, not just, as you say, because we're not getting these sit-down interviews and they wouldn't give them, but because it's quite right that we ask the questions that are holding them to account. Martin,
I would just say one other thing, which is that, if David Lammy answered our emails and said, sure, I'll do a sit-down interview with you and I'll answer these questions, or, if Keir Starmer did, or, Yvette Cooper or whoever, then obviously we would do that instead.
Of course.
We're not doing this just to, to kind of prove a point. We're doing it because we don't have another option.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because this is not just a performance. This is not kind of a performative thing that we have chosen to do. I think in one of the clips, Phil actually says, I have every right to ask these questions. In our Gaza Shows article, we talk about how people have every right to disagree with government actions, and we're kind of moving further and further away from people having that confidence and that knowledge, you know, not because of any fault of their own, but because the system is becoming so repressive in so many ways. Martin, are there any articles that you want to highlight from this year? Perhaps some of your own work, maybe a story that you'd like to just shine a spotlight on before you leave us tonight?
Well, I'll just very briefly mention, I mean, we obviously we've talked a huge amount about Gaza, quite rightly. And I think obviously this year, because, you know, of the genocide and because of the UK's complicity in it, that has been the focus of a lot of our work, quite rightly. But we obviously do work as well beyond that as well. So I just wanted to mention just briefly an investigation that I did in the summer, which was an investigation into a company called Zinc Network. Now, Zinc Network is contracted by lots of government departments, including the Foreign Office and the Home Office. And what we found was that they were involved in lots of different projects across the world. And many of these projects, the company was hiring social media influencers to essentially push British government propaganda in different countries. And the social media influencers were made to sign non-disclosure agreements, basically saying that they weren't allowed to disclose who was funding them, who was kind of telling them what to say. And I think this really there's two things I think this shows. One is like the huge reach of the British Foreign Office and the British government across the world. You know, we often think about the government's role in Gaza or in, you know, certain countries, but really the influence is enormous. And, you know, some of this was taking place in countries like Slovakia, which, you know, the media never in this country, you know, when was the last time you saw a story about Slovakia in this country in the mainstream media? But actually, our government is funding campaigns in that country, secret campaigns. The other thing, the reason I mentioned that article is because that whole investigation would not have been possible without whistleblowers. And, you know, whistleblowers are so vital to the work that we do. And it may be an insider who's able to kind of leak loads of documents and, you know, whatever. But it may be just someone who's, you know, heard something and kind of lets us know a little tip off about something. Maybe they've just got some small, you know, tidbit of information that is useful. And so I guess I'm making an appeal to anyone watching, anyone who knows anyone. You know, we have, if you go onto our website, there's ways of contacting us securely. Whistleblowers obviously are dealt with confidentially. And yeah, please do get in touch. I think I have this theory that everyone is sitting on a story. They just don't always realize it.
I think that we have definitely proved over the years that we are a trusted media organisation. We are a regulated media organisation. Whilst we are independent, you know, we are very, very thorough. You know, everything is done properly. So I echo that plea, if you like. And, you know, you're right in saying people would just have no idea what the British state gets up to unless there are people willing to go and dig and find the stories, and quite rightly, those who are willing to give the stories too. This year, we were denied a pass from Labour Party conference and from an arms fair. And Martin, let's just bring you back for 1 second to give us a tiny update. We also got denied from having a parliamentary pass as well. Now, you know, I left Parliament quite a long time ago. It's not necessarily a place that is, you know, the cheeriest place. It's a place where you go to get work done and to find out what the government is doing. And we've been denied a parliamentary press pass. you specifically have been denied a parliamentary press pass. So the application is in your name. Could you just give us an ever so brief update on that application?
Yeah, so about 500 or so journalists have these parliamentary press passes, media passes. And basically, it just allows you to get into Parliament whenever you want. Without it, you need an invite. You need someone to accompany you the entire time to kind of make sure you're not doing anything you shouldn't. And if you don't have that, you could be kicked out by armed police. And it's really, really useful to have one of these passes. I really don't like going to Parliament, right? But actually, to do the work that we do, it's really, really useful because, first of all, you can kind of sit in on committee meetings and everything that's going on in Parliament and kind of see it live and talk to politicians. But the other thing is that it allows you to kind of build up sources and whistleblowers. And I was just saying there about whistleblowers. Before, there are all sorts of people in government who are maybe doing jobs that they're not quite happy with. And those people are crucial to a lot of the work that we do. And going into Parliament, being able to talk to MPs, peers, but also advisors and, the people working behind the scenes as well, having that kind of access is so important. So we applied in the summer, we got rejected. Initially, they said this was because of capacity issues. There wasn't enough space for us. And I thought immediately, well, we all thought that was highly unlikely. And when I checked, it turned out there is no limit on the number of media passes they can hand out. So I filed a request under the Freedom of Information Act to get hold of the internal emails that they'd sent about our application. And I found that in these discussions, they had flagged up the particular standpoint of our investigations. And they cited one article in particular, which was literally about concerns over pro-Israel bias in Parliament. So off the back of that, we asked for the case to be reviewed. But they said not only the decision is final, but also they said we're not going to allow you to submit a new application for 12 months. So we launched a campaign that you may have seen, and we're very, very grateful that more than, I think it was 5,800 of our readers and supporters signed this open letter calling on Parliament to give us a pass, along with more than 100 leading journalists, politicians, campaigners. Later, 27 MPs also signed an early day motion in Parliament calling for the authorities to give us a pass. And now we still don't know, we still don't have the pass yet, but we've recently had some very, very encouraging movement from the authorities. And I'm really hoping that we'll have some good news come January. But if we are successful with this, I think it's really important to that everyone knows that this would not have been possible without the support of declassified readers and supporters. So, well done to everyone who signed the letter, who shared the tweets, whatever it was, because, even to get to this point where they're making these kind of encouraging movements is really incredible. And it will mean that we can do better journalism and more journalism in the future if we do get a pass.
Yeah, honestly, thank you so much for that update. Let's hope for good news in the new year. Thank you very much for your journalism and your contributions, Martin. I think it isn't a conspiracy. There are to have 3 separate events where we're kind of denied entry. It becomes a bit of a problem in terms of doing journalism and freedom of the press. So I'll just echo Martin's sentiments. There were 27 members of Parliament who signed an early day motion as well. Cross-party, people who probably have a political belief in freedom of the press, but fundamentally and most importantly, thank you to the over 5,800 of you who signed that open letter urging Parliament to give us a parliamentary press pass. I'm just going to say it again, we cannot do this work without your support. that documentary meant that we had to take journalists to Cyprus to ask these questions. We had to travel, work behind the scenes for many, many months. Some of this is not fast and quick work, but it's important work. And every single donation that you make goes towards supporting our journalism. We're trying to get a 25,000 before the 1st of January. I would absolutely love it if we can do it before Christmas. Not asking much at all, but yeah, if you have anything spare to give, please do give and donate to Declassified, because we will keep using that resource to challenge powerful people in public service journalism. I'm really happy to come to our very new deputy editor, Dania Akkad. You are, how many weeks have you been with Declassified now? Although you've hit the ground running, editing articles, writing your own articles, reviewing all of our work. It's brilliant to have you here. How long have you been with Declassified?
I think can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Hello. I think it's been 6 weeks or 7 weeks. I've lost track. It's been really busy.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable amount of work in that time. And just tell me about a little bit about where you've come from, Dania.
Sure. So I've joined Declassified from Middle East Eye. I was working investigations there. No beef to Middle East Eye. I think it's a great website doing really wonderful work. I wanted to join Declassified because I really appreciate the kind of work that's being done here. It's extremely focused investigation. Some of it can take years of work to do, and really takes kind of expert knowledge in some of these fields to understand, and really networks of contacts. And I was frankly tired of being scooped on a lot of stories by you guys. So I thought, if you can't beat them, join them. No, not really. I really wanted to be part of this great team because I was thinking of Declassified as kind of like almost a detective unit. And I've joined, and I really do feel it has come through. I love working with the journalists at Declassified. Everyone is really serious, really focused, and there's a lot of collaboration. So I'm very happy to be here.
Very much echo those sentiments. It is a serious organisation that wants to do proper investigative work. Absolutely fantastic. You're going to take us, Dania, through some of the ways that our work has had impact in the last year. We're just going to kind of start to reflect now. So journalism is important. We've said it time and time again. We don't want it to just stay on the page, because what's the point of that? What has some of the impact of our work been? Over to you.
Yeah. So basically, I assigned myself to do a piece for the end of the year looking at the impact that Declassified has had on the ground and tangibly, not just reporting things, but actually has affected change. I wanted to kind of look under the hood. And obviously, I've kept up with Declassified's reporting over the years, but I wanted to really look closely and kind of pinpoint the impact we've had. And frankly, it was a bit overwhelming because almost every story reveals some new piece of information that the public would not have known about if it weren't for Declassified. But we also have really had some tangible impacts. And I think of a story recently where we uncovered that Israeli army officers were being trained at a defense college in Belgravia during the genocide. That was something that had never been revealed. We used facial recognition tools to do that. And soon after our reporting, got picked up a little bit by the mainstream who hadn't found this out, but then was sort of reporting what we'd already put out there. And the UK government stopped that practice after our story on that. So that was just kind of one recent example. We've exposed MPs who have failed to declare all expense paid trips to Israel, and our reporting has led to investigations which and the MPs have been found in breach of parliamentary rules. So we've really done a watchdogging job in a lot of ways. Some of our reporting, actually Martin, who was just on, has done a brilliant job reporting on the all-party parliamentary group on defense tech. And after his reporting, which he did a video actually, which is incredible, which I hope people will watch, where he there was a company funding this APPG, and it said that it had manufacturing facilities in the UK and that it was a UK company. And he did a video where he went around to all of the addresses associated with this company and tried to find out what was actually going on. And he came to find out that actually it was a UK subsidiary of a company owned by the Israeli state. And his reporting eventually led to the APPG being shut down. And there are still some ramifications from that. So, really, really doing the watchdogging job that the mainstream media used to do, but now we're doing it. And, our reporting has sparked protests. It's, as Martin mentioned, stirred controversy in Slovakia. So a lot of impact has been had this year. And in particular, I really wanted to focus on stories that my colleague Phil Miller has worked on, which have had a real impact in Kenya. He's been reporting on British impact in Kenya for years now. And I actually, before I came on today, I was messaging him, trying to figure out how he got interested in Kenya and involved in it. And it seems like he reported one story and then just kind of kept in touch with sources over the years and eventually took a trip out there. But this has led to a whole file of reporting. And there have been a lot of impacts that his reporting has had this year. He, 3 years ago, discovered that the British Army was routinely firing white phosphorus around farming land and other parts of Kenya. Obviously, incredibly dangerous. It's a toxic substance. We wouldn't tolerate that here. But in October, we learned that actually the British Army had paused the practice right around, I guess, the time shortly after Phil's reporting about 3 years ago. But we only learned 3 years later that they had paused this practice. His reporting has also helped get compensation, 2.9 million, I think, pounds for people who were impacted by a fire in 2021 that was started by the British Army, who were doing a military exercise at a Kenyan wildlife refuge. His reporting, I think through FOIAs, he found out that there had been 5 fires that the British Army had started soon, like just before the major fire in 2021. And it was that reporting that was heavily cited by the claimant's lawyer and helped them get this money from the British Army. And there was a man who was killed in that fire. I mean, it was really serious. And there were, I think, several hundred victims of that fire. So a really serious thing. And Phil's reporting helped them get that support. And finally, just most recently, the Kenyan Parliament put out a report talking about British Army practices in their country. And within that report, they called for an inquiry into the death of a man named Robert Suarez Sure, who died after igniting an explosive that he had found while clearing debris where the British Army were exercising in Kenya. And the argument has been that he wasn't trained, he wasn't sufficiently trained. And so he didn't realize that this debris that he'd picked up from the ground was actually not a candle, it was an explosive. And he died after lighting it in his house. So during this report that the Kenyan government has put out just a couple of weeks ago, they called for an inquiry into his death. And Phil's reporting was heavily relied on for that report. So if people have a chance to read some of Phil's reporting on Kenya, it's something you really won't see in the mainstream media. And these are some of my favorite stories that Declassified has done.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the things that you have just referenced there, Dania, are not small things, and they're certainly not small things to the people that are affected. So this is about, proper processes, everything from proper processes and procedures in Parliament to compensation for people in Kenya. And everything in between. So I very much echo hats off to Phil Miller, our editor, who has worked tirelessly on lots of different stories now, actually, in relation to Kenya. And it is amazing, isn't it, that there is not a peep from the mainstream media about his work. I mean, sometimes you'll get murmurs, a little bit here and there, but it's just incredible.
Yeah, no, it's and also just the years that he's taken to actually get to know all of these contacts and these issues and the way he's kept on it. I've been really impressed. I mean, I turned up 6 weeks ago and literally I can see he's tracking all of these things happening in Kenya along with everything else. So I just, yeah, I really think he's a public servant and his reporting is really powerful.
And honestly, long may that reporting continue. And we are all very excited to see what stories you have to contribute in 2026. Dania, thank you so much for joining us. Dania is our deputy editor at Declassified. Thank you so much. We are going to now just mention again a wonderful and I think really important event that Declassified, if we do say so ourselves, that Declassified are putting on Saturday, the 31st of January. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this before our final guest tonight. So on Saturday, the 31st of January, we are having an event called Challenging the War Machine. I don't think any of us could have gone through the last 2 years in a journalistic sense as a citizen watching on our phones the horrors unfold in Gaza and in the rest of the world and not think, something needs to change, whether it's about independent media, whether it is about our political system, our economic system, the military industrial complex, the way we hold politicians to account. Well, this event is going to be for you. I particularly have to say, if you're a journalism student as well, or if you know any journalism students, because there's going to be a lot of journalists at this event, but we are going to be covering themes like how to challenge the drive to war. The kind of the UK government's drive to war. Mark talked about it at the very beginning, the increase in military spending, seeing economic growth being driven through military spending, because they've got no other imagination about what they could do. We are going to be talking about how we challenge the UK's support for Israel. We're going to be talking about how we build an independent media ecosystem and how we challenge. And I do love this term. We can either call them the mainstream media or we can call them the legacy media, how we challenge the legacy media. And fundamentally, as I said, we're not going to be just thinking about analysing the problem because everybody's got their own ideas about what the problem is. We're going to be talking about what we do about the several sets of problems and crises that we are facing. The last session of the day will be about how we build an active anti-war majority in the face of the drive to war. I think it will be a very, very important event. Sell us out, sell the tickets, please, sell them out. We are going to be in London. And we said it before, but we really do in 2026 want to be out there more in person. I think so much of our lives are online now, aren't there? And we want to make sure that people have in-person contact with the journalists, their stories, the issues. And on Saturday, the 31st of January, that is one way you can be involved. Tickets are online. We've got different tiers of tickets for different levels, different kind of price points of affordability. So please go and get yourself one. Okay, our very final guest. I'm really, really pleased that he could join us. It's Hamza Yusuf. He's a British Palestinian journalist. Hello, Hamza. Thank you so much for being here. And he's a regular Declassified UK contributor. Welcome tonight, Hamza. Lovely to see you. We can't pass analysing this year, and it's been touched on several times, but we can't pass reviewing this year without taking a moment for the mainstream / legacy media. I'm just wondering, I know you do a lot of work kind of analysing and assessing online how they frame different stories, and particularly in relation to the genocide in Gaza. Hamza, to start, I just wanted some of your reflections on how they've been this year.
Pleasure to be here, firstly. It's a tough act to follow with all the heavyweights before me. The media, as you mentioned, you can't discuss or analyze what's happened in the last 2 years without looking at the media. They, from the beginning, manufactured consent. They whitewashed crimes. They laundered Israeli crimes. They applied a different standard to the victims. They applied a different standard to interviewing different respective people. So Palestinians had to jump through hoops first. Do you condemn? What are your views? Why were your family targeted? Israelis were given a free rein to say and express as they please. So from the beginning, there's been a meticulous operation to whitewash and effectively uphold a fiction. Whilst genocide and ethnic cleansing was taking place, they sold war, they sold self-defense, and they sold retaliation to the public. And yeah, the kind of from October 2023 onwards, it was really that. It was a crash course in how to manufacture consent and how to launder Israeli war crimes. And as has been mentioned before, there wasn't the work of, for example, Declassified UK in revealing and exposing different aspects of his complicity, holding to account. There was none of that from the mainstream media. You mentioned it yourself on these daily shows and morning shows from across the broadcasters and the press. There's just no accountability, no level of scrutiny applied to politicians who have effectively greenlit, supported and armed a genocide. So yeah, we can't look at this chapter without looking at the indispensable role of the British media.
Yeah, and more broadly, I mean, I was just wondering if, you know, I mean, it's hard to. What we don't want to do is characterize this as a ceasefire moment. I know you've said a lot online about the ceasefire repeatedly being violated, and you know, many people have been killed since this supposed ceasefire. So I'm not I don't want to characterize this as before the genocide and after, and genocides are much more complicated than that, and the legacies of that level of aggression by an occupier are enduring, and they're decades long, and they're, you know, it's just almost impossible to calculate. But I did wonder, Hamza, if there is anything that you've reflected on about the political system, and anything that you think people really need to know this about the system that we live within.
Yeah, I think Mark alluded to this earlier, and I always, when you talk about the media, I always try to mention that there are kind of levers behind the scenes, and I think the pro-Israel lobby that operates meticulously in this country you can't separate the two. You can't look at the complicity, the active role the media's played, without looking at the influence and the impact of the pro-Israel lobby. And I would argue that's still fairly taboo. I think it's more and more people have a recognition of it, more and more people recognize, and sometimes don't fall for the facade, but it's still a bit prickly, it's still a bit sensitive, it's still a bit territory that people don't want to, or waters that people don't want to enter. And I think,
and do you say that, sorry to interject, because of the often the accusation that you're being anti-Semitic by talking about a system of lobbying a political system?
Exactly. And all you have to do is take a look at kind of somebody done kind of a breakdown of the language that's been used in the last week. We know what happened in Sydney the other week, and kind of the coverage since, and the kind of the sound bites are near enough the same. So across the UK and across the US, in terms of how it's been framed, how they've used the opportunity to cynically attack and smear and undermine the pro-Palestine movement. And it's kind of very similar talking points across the board. It's like, they were last year, the year before, they were going after from the river to the sea. Now it's globalized intifada, and all of them are almost in sync. And you have to ask, like, when there is an attempt to carry a particular approach, or use a particular moment, or ensure that a particular message is delivered, when everybody's in sync, it's almost giving you the answer in and of itself in terms of influence of how people operate behind the scenes. And that's, as I said, it's been quite revealing of late, especially in the last year, of how many times, whether it's BBC, Sky, Guardian, Times, all the legacy media, how they've somehow had used the same language at certain moments. And you have to wonder, these people have studied journalism. They've got, they're intelligent people. There's other words in the English language that can be used, but they stick to particular narratives and choose their words carefully. And again, it goes back to what is taking place behind the scenes. That means that's the particular message being received.
And I think sometimes, I think you're right that there has been some movement in relation to, thanks to organisations like Declassified UK and yourself and other contributors who are kind of demystifying the process of lobbying. I mean, states all over the world lobby governments, and so does business, and so does corporations, so do people as well, and to varying levels of power. But yeah, something as horrific to witness in Sydney or at the synagogue in the UK, you think surely there are moments that will be free from it being used politically, cynically, you would hope. I mean, in terms of Declassified's work on how the political system is lobbied, you would hope we have moved on somewhat from that kind of being, classified as anti-Semitic. Political systems are lobbied, and we must be able to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you said, when we talk about external influences, it's fine to say there's like Russian external influence. It's fine to say that, as many do, oh, the British state is captured by Russia, for example. But if you were to then apply that and say, well, actually, there's as Declassified revealed, archives are endless in terms of the influence of not just the pro-Israel lobby, but the link that they have to the Israeli state and Israeli government. And that would be for any, I think you alluded to it in your article with Mark not long ago, for any other country, that would be like a threat to democracy. But we like to uphold this facade that we're democratic and we uphold these principles, we're independent in what we do, etc. And that's obviously not the case. And just as it plays out in the media, it plays out in the other departments as well. And as I said, you can't really separate the two, especially when you look at the last 2 years and just how there's different junctures and different flashpoints at which everybody's kind of come in sync. We saw immediately the beheaded baby story, for example, how everybody, the front page, and they equally moved to the other side just as quick. I mean, it was in spring or summer when everybody suddenly they tried to spotlight the famine in Gaza and completely divorced from reality, as if this happened out of thin air, not recognizing their coverage, how they whitewashed crimes, how they failed to report accurately led to this moment. So it's just, they're always in sync. They're always, the media class always move in sync, and that they ultimately moved only when the government did earlier this year. And that, again, I told you, they're not holding power to account. They're fully aligned with power throughout.
And I mean, there's so much to unpack that we just don't have time for. Maybe we should just have you on and we can analyze everything in one show, because so much has happened. It is quite overwhelming, isn't it, to think about the impact on the political system and what we've learned. But we must assess what we've learned about how our system works. I was gonna say something because I think it's often just overlooked, Hamza, that when we're analysing political systems and we're looking about how to hold ministers to account, there is a deeply personal story and a very human story about what has happened in Palestine and specifically in Gaza, but of course all of Palestine. And it has been a painful couple of years, hasn't it, to see live stream to our phones a genocide, to see then how the mainstream media characterizes and frames that, and how our political system responds to those people. I don't know if you have anything to say on that in some kind of closing reflections.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it was the most confessed to crime of any crime. I think they made clear what they were going to do from the outset. They said they were going to reduce Gaza to a city of tents. They said they'll make it a place where no human could exist. The genocidal intent that has been documented is endless. And they went and did that to devastating effect. And we watched it every day unfold on our screens. And then we watched the reactions and how that was repackaged and how that was exported as something else. And that in and of itself is difficult, because you see something live and it's not, we've moved on with social media. We don't need to wait for footage to come in. We don't need to wait to get the full story by the time Newsnight comes on at 10, whatever time, I don't watch it, whatever time it comes on. But it was the raw footage coming in, the kind of people narrating their own stories, their own people being killed, their families, and they're recording it, having to capture it and to document it. And it's still being treated suspiciously, not being treated the right way, etc. And then it's why I think there was quite a lot of disagreements when the media shifted slightly, because a lot of people are like, well, this is good. And I took the view on, no, it's not, because if they can now report accurately, if they can scrutinize, if they can cast down Israel's claims, if they can actually hold Israel to account, they could have done that from the beginning. And we didn't see that. We saw manufacturing of consent. We saw Israeli crimes laundered. I mean, the amount of times I would read in the Guardian article that the Israeli military says, or how things are framed. And there was a few moments which a war crime would unfold, and the Guardian's immediate article would say, we've received no comment from the IDF, but they would ordinarily say, and it's stuff like that. And you're looking at it thinking, civilians have been killed. There's been another bloodbath, countless litany of war crimes daily. And it just wasn't sold that way. You had to almost to persuade people that this was happening when it's happening daily, and people paying with their lives, paying tragically, and it still doesn't cut through. So that's why it makes it even more important, because we've seen the impact, we've seen the ramifications, we've seen how it impacts people daily. There's an illusion that there's a ceasefire. The people that have lived through 2 years of this, there is no respite for them. There's no peace. There's no calm. They're now just dealing with the aftermath of perhaps a less intense campaign of sustained bombardment, but nothing else. And even that's not properly reflected. So it's for them, I say it's for them that we should hold power to account, we should hold the media to account, because they were let down by the world. And as I said, they were narrating and documenting and capturing their lived experience and being treated as if they weren't worthy. And the people carrying out that annihilation, that erasure, were allowed to narrate and mark their own homework. And that's the upside down world that we live in, which is why we need to change it.
No, I completely agree. And just as a kind of final thing to say to you, a moment for the journalists in Gaza who work day and night and day throughout the most unimaginable conditions possible to document the war crimes and the horror of the genocide. So yeah, to them, they are heroes. Hamza, you're such an important voice. Thank you for everything that you do with Declassified and outside of Declassified too. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure, always.
Thank you. We are going to close now, and I'm going to close with just a couple of reflections. First of all, thank you for getting our target on our fundraiser down. We are now £7,833 away from meeting our target of £25,000. If you've got anything spare, chuck it our way, because we will continue to go after to challenge those powerful people to seek the answers to the questions that should be asked by the mainstream legacy media, but won't be. They've shown it won't be, but those questions will be asked by us. Please join us at our next live. Please ask us questions during the live if you have any. Please also come to our Challenging the War Machine event on Saturday, the 31st of January in London, where you'll meet loads of the team in person. We've got people like Peter Roborn and Loki and Laura Webster from the national newspaper coming, and activists and other journalists as well. Some unbelievable contributors. I just want to finish by saying Merry Christmas to every single person who celebrates, and a very, very happy New Year. But most importantly, a new year where we can continue to hold those powerful people to account and seek truth and justice through journalism. Thank you so much for watching this evening.